Welcome to the Libido Lounge, where we focus on all things love, lust, and libido. We believe that fabulous sex is important to health as exercise and good food. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Lounge. In this particular episode, we're going to talk about the emotional ecosystem, in particular of women throughout their lives. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the science, about why moods sometimes change, about what is going on a hormonal level that I really wish we were actually taught as very, very young girls. I'm going to start by talking about the hormone serotonin. So this is all wrapped up in libido because typically, if we do not feel happy, if we don't feel great in our body, then we're not very motivated most of the time to engage in sexual intimacy. So there's a relationship, right, where it's like we feel good, we feel happy, we feel full of energy, and then we tend to have more capacity to be able to engage sexually. And I see this in couples I work with, for example, where one person gains weight or loses a job or has something that is actually impacting the confidence of oneself. And all of a sudden, sex oftentimes is out the window, off the table. One of the reasons for this with women is, as far as hormonal changes, is estrogen is so related to impacting the hormone serotonin. So we know serotonin is the happy hormone. It makes us feel good. We feel happy and relaxed. And these are emotions that typically encourage a healthy libido. Now, estrogen will actually encourage serotonin utilization in the body. So it has the ability to potentize the serotonin we have. Therefore, at times of the month where we are having more estrogen as menstruating women, we typically have a happier outlook on life, right? We're less triggered, we may more be sexually interested, these sorts of things. Now, what happens when you're menstruating, whether you're full on menstruating or you're in perimenopause, is towards the end of that cycle, that estrogen falls really, really low. And when this happens, oftentimes this is where we can have mood changes. And oftentimes this is a confusing thing, both for women and for men. This is why I wish this was talked about more early on in childhood and young adulthood, because what's actually happening, there's many things that are happening, but one is that we are having less serotonin stimulation in our body because of that lowered amount of estrogen. And so typically that means a more unstable mood, right? So these things go hand in hand together. There's nothing women are doing wrong. This is just the impact of estrogen changes on the brain and on the psyche. Now, throughout menopause can be very, very difficult, and sometimes it can be a 10-year long ordeal. I've even seen it last longer, but for most people, it's 10 years or less, which is still a really long time of going through these hormonal shifts and changes and the body adapting to some of these new hormonal inputs and outputs, right? So estrogen, essentially, when it falls dramatically during the menopause years, the body has to re-regulate. And initially, this can create a lowering of the utilization of serotonin in the body. And we can have all of these feelings of not feeling well, of being sad, of not feeling like we're very motivated, right, to have sex. So there's this real important interplay of estrogen on serotonin. Testosterone, we talked about on other episodes, and testosterone has the capacity to essentially create a stronger libido, right? So at menopause, for example, we have a lowering of estrogen, we see serotonin get out of whack, we see testosterone get out of whack. So there's a lot of changes in that emotional ecosystem that are happening. So what do we do about this? So we've previously talked about hormone replacement therapy and bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. So these are some things that you can do. Other things you can do is you can actually support the serotonin system in your body. So we can use things like 5-HTP and SAMe and B6, which are all precursors to making serotonin. They're the nutrients the body needs to actually make serotonin. So we can support our serotonin that way. we can remember, right, that things like oxytocin support serotonin. So oxytocin is the love hormone, it's the cuddle hormone, it's the orgasm hormone, but it's also the touch hormone. So, oxytocin can help with that release of the serotonin. And when we have that extra serotonin because of the oxytocin, well, that can help with mood stabilization and can help us be more interested in engaging with our partner. So, easy non sexual ways of increasing oxytocin are just cuddling. Are just hugging. So, this might be something that's really helpful when you're really working on your emotional ecosystem and working to maintain balance, is beginning to spend more time in touch. And this can be as simple as starting every day with a long, deep hug with your partner. If you're not partnered, then making sure when you get together with your friends, really embracing them in a hug. You know, when I'm together with my girlfriends, oftentimes we will hold hands as we're walking down the street, that sort of thing, just as a way of giving each other some extra oxytocin, showing a little bit of love. And so we can provide this for each other, not only in partnership, but also in nature of even our heterosexual relationships with our female friends. Another thing that you can consider with this and the emotional ecosystem, another thing we have to consider is stress. So, stress is going to really kill the libido. It's going to kill oxytocin. It's going to negatively often impact things like thyroid hormone. It can negatively impact our sex hormones. So, we'll talk about stress and what to do about it a little bit later on. But for now, when we're talking about this emotional ecosystem, we're talking about the balance of things like testosterone, estrogen, and our hormones, we absolutely need to mention that stress is a big, big, big thing. And one of the things that I want to say too about the emotional ecosystem really comes down to safety. And this is something that I feel like is such a under talked about and under realized part of the male female dynamic. And oftentimes, women feel emotionally unsafe due to very, very simple things, right? It can be as simple as you saying something to your partner in the morning and the tone that you were responded to with felt a little hurtful. Maybe it felt a little cutting or a little sharp. Maybe you put the trash by the door for your partner to take out and they just walked around it. And so all of a sudden maybe you feel like you're doing everything around the house, right? Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, right? There's always two perspectives. And some of this work is to help realize and help to bring light to the differences of the estrogen and the female brain and the testosterone impact on the male brain, right? So, some of this is to really understand that. But the initial layer of this is from a standpoint of these basic things, right? And so, from a female perspective, sometimes it's so easy because we're so acutely aware the way estrogen impacts the brain, as far as the way it lights up the brain, the way the blood flows in the brain because of this particular hormone. It's so easy to hear certain things and create stories out of it around, like, I feel attacked, I feel abandoned, I feel yelled at, right? All due to these tiny little things that may have been said in passing, and it may have, to the masculine brain, just been direct and just been not really paying attention to the emotions, because the way testosterone acts on the masculine brain is really about focused. So a man that is really focused on, I have to go out, get out the door because I want to get this paycheck, because I want to contribute to the family household this way. That's the way that testosterone acts on the brain, right? So the man might be thinking about that. Perhaps he's, if you say something and it's said in a the response is in a short-cutting way, sometimes that can be due to as simple as, hey, he was focused on work, he was focused on his thing, and it wasn't that it was meant to be derogatory in any way. It was just meant that he was focused on other things, right? So that's important to understand. And so then the question is, okay, so what, we can get into this vicious cycle, right? Where all of a sudden woman feels like she's snapped at a little bit and thinks she's snapped at, and it had that impact on her, but the man didn't even realize it, right? Or women lay the trash out by the door and the man is so focused that literally, because his brain does not work like a woman's brain, he did not think to bring the trash out because he's so focused on, I just got to get to work, I just got to get to work, I just got to get to work. It's literally how the masculine brain works differently than the feminine brain. But from a safety perspective, if a female is, reaching out and saying like, "Oh, I need help, please take the trash out," but she doesn't say that with words, she just says that with this trash by the door. And then all of a sudden, man doesn't do that because he's focused on this other thing that he thinks is the number one priority to provide. And so she feels all of a sudden that he's not responding. And then she might attack him. She might say, "Why did you not do this?" And he feels like, wow, she never even gave me the opportunity to do this, right? And so then the man can sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, I'm being like attacked all the time. And both in this cycle, right? This safety cycle just continues and continues and continues. And so I originally learned about this sort of concept from Alison Armstrong. She writes these great books, great courses called things like Understanding Men and Women. But what's interesting is, so that's what initially turned me on to some of these differences. But it is interesting when we go into research and we're actually looking then in MRIs and we're looking at studies that are showing, oh, this is what estrogen does as far as where the blood flow goes to in the brain. Wherever the blood flow, that is where we respond from. Testosterone does something different. Wherever testosterone goes, that is where testosterone dominant brains respond from. So there is really in science this very, very accurate thing of men's response versus women's response. And because we're not taught this, oftentimes if a man responds a certain way, because oftentimes as women, it's so easy to be like, well, that should just be obvious, right? And so if a man responds a certain way and it's responding in a way that seems like, well, why did you do this? It should be so obvious what I wanted you to do. I wanted you to take out the trash, right? So if a man responds in a different way, then what is we think is obvious, and all of a sudden as women, it's so easy to feel, a sense of invalidation, that we don't matter, that we're doing all the work and these sorts of things. And that's where that vicious cycle of safety happens. Because if something happens in the morning, that there are these small triggers from the lack of understanding of how the female brain works versus the male brain, then oftentimes when it comes to our emotional ecosystem and it comes to having sex or being intimate or even cuddling and getting an oxytocin release, oftentimes as women, because of the way the female brain and the blood flows to the female brain, oftentimes this triggers this like loop in the female brain where it's very difficult to think about sexy time because there's a sense of feeling almost like a safety violation, an emotional safety violation earlier in that day. So part of really understanding the emotional ecosystem as well is really beginning to truly understand and accept the differences between male and female brains. And, and understanding that, yes, when men look at women in their lives, yes, women have ups and downs of their moods, of their emotions, and all of this is based upon the level of the change of estrogen and progesterone in the brain, at any given time. Now, of course, this becomes way more stable once menopause hits, right? Once menopause hits, oftentimes there's this sense of major change where there's this less of this up and down. And sometimes for women, this can be seen as sometimes less of a, motivating time in life. It can have all sorts of different like midlife types of effects that we'll talk about in later episodes. But the biggest thing for now is understanding that there's nothing like wrong with the female brain. There's nothing wrong with these emotional changes. This is literally due to blood flow in the brain in acting in different ways. Just like with men, their response is literally due to blood flow changing and flowing in different ways. So we create safety in this emotional ecosystem by beginning to understand each other. And one of the biggest things to begin to understand each other is to not assume things. And so, asking questions such as if it's like, wow, that tone really bothered you. Say like, let's say the tone in the morning, from a question really bothered you. The question is, then asking the partner to say, hey, you use what I heard as a tone. I just want to check in about it. Are you mad at me? Did I misread it? Did the tone have any meaning? I just want to make sure that I'm understanding things so I don't create stories, right? And once I personally started doing this in my relationships, it was truly a game changer because not only did it really help relationally for me, but it also helped me see so much in my day to day how if something was said in the morning and it was like throwing me off because I didn't understand a tone in this example, then when I could ask the questions, then I didn't have to go down the story of like, well, maybe it went bad and I'm on edge and like maybe he's feeling this way and maybe he's upset with me or whatever the story gets created, right? So it actually stops that story from being created so that we can focus on the present, right? So we can absolutely focus on the present. So the idea here is asking questions, really asking these questions to say, okay, well, I don't understand this tone. Can you tell me a little bit about it? And what you'll find out most of the time is like, I didn't even really have a tone, or I was really stressed out because I was worried about this thing at work. I didn't even realize that I said that in a way where you would even notice, right? And so when we ask questions, one, we can start to separate the own story we've created about these situations. Like, hey, I set that trash by the door. I noticed you didn't take it out. Oh, I was so focused on work, I didn't even realize that you needed me to take it out. So it's very different, right? Then we can start to work together to create this emotional safety and harmony where it's like, oh, okay, well, what can be a strategy if you need help taking out the trash? What can be that strategy to let him know? What can be that strategy to do it where he can stay focused on what he needs to focus on because that's the man brain. And so how do we actually work together in this emotional ecosystem so that we're both allowing ourselves to feel safe, we're both allowing ourselves to feel emotionally heard, and we're both allowing ourselves to feel supported and allowing ourselves to feel the depths of the oxytocin by coming together in safety, by sitting together, by holding hands, by cuddling, all these things that we really begin to self-regulate with. So this is how to think about the emotional ecosystem, really all of these different hormones, anything from thyroid to adrenals to sex hormones to vasopressin to oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine and many, many other hormones are all intricately related into our emotional ecosystem, that there's this oscillation, right, throughout the month, throughout the years, throughout our lives where these hormone levels change. And as they do, the libido gets impacted. But one of the biggest ways of working with this is continuing to come back to that cuddle, to that connection, to that oxytocin, and continuing to ask questions and helping each other understand each other through the impact of safety and the emotional system. So that's it for now. Thank you for joining for another episode of The Lounge. This is Dr. Diane reminding you to stay classy, stay sexy, and stay a little badassy. Thank you for listening to the Libido Lounge. Please don't keep me a secret. Please share this with your friends. You can find me on YouTube, on Instagram, as well as how to work with me at mylibidodoc.com.